Good morning and welcome to everyone present and to the listening and viewing public. This meeting is being broadcast, as you know, live on the Parliament's Channel 11, Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. I would remind members and officials present to direct any questions and concerns through the chair. Also, to kindly activate your microphones when you speak and deactivate them after you've finished, and to put your cell phones on silent. Thank you. So the purpose of this meeting is to continue the committee's engagement with stakeholders pursuant to its examination into the Telecommunications Services of Trinidad and Tobago, TSTT's management of the cybersecurity breach of data before, during, and after its occurrence. Today we have with us Ms. Lisa Agard, former CEO at TSTT, Mr. Shiva Ramnarayan, former CFO at TSTT, representative from the Ministry of Public Utilities, and a representative from the Ministry of Finance Investments Division. I would ask my committee members to please introduce themselves, starting with Member Mark.
Good morning, Wade Mark, member.
Good morning, Richie Sukai, member.
Pleasant good morning, Rujanat and Earthing, member.
Hi, Stephen McClatchy, member.
Good morning and welcome. Laura Lizama Leasing, member.
Thank you. And we also have with us our ICT Director at Parliament, Mr. Gareth Ferguson, and the Senior IT Infrastructure Specialist, Mr. Ansem John. So, if you could just bear with me while I say a few things. On the last occasion, we heard from representatives at TSTT, and we will be continuing discussions with them later this morning, but that will be in camera, given the sensitivity of some of the topics we will be exploring, especially as pertains to the company's security defense infrastructure. Before meeting with the TSTT team, however, we really wanted to hear from both Ms. Agard and Mr. Ramnarayan. As many of you will know, Ms. Agard was TSTT's CEO at the time of the ransomware attack on the 9th of October 2023. She is an attorney at law by profession with over 23 years experience in the telecommunications and broadcasting sector. As many may also recall, at the last meeting it was implied that responsibility for erroneous comments by the Minister of Public Utilities in Parliament on the 1st of November 2023 was based on information provided to him by the then executive. As Ms. Agard was the company's chief executive officer at that time, we felt it only fair that she be given an opportunity to give her side of the story and to help shed light on the matter. Now let me make it clear from the outset. The mandate of this Joint Select Committee is to inquire into and to report to Parliament on state enterprises falling within our purview. We exercise investigative powers for the purpose of oversight on behalf of and for the benefit of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And at the same time, we always offer an opportunity, a forum to learn about challenges, disappointments, and achievements on the part of the company concerned. These hearings always provide an opportunity for stakeholders to voice concerns, to increase public awareness, understanding, and support in respect of the particular state enterprise operations. There is no government, there is no opposition on this committee. We are one team with the same mission. Joint Select Committees are bipartisan in nature. Members are not looking to score political points or to take sides, whether for or against TSTT, nor is anyone looking to pick on the company. On the contrary, this is about the pursuit of improved service delivery and accountability in a state enterprise. So this is not a platform for launching any personal attacks against anyone, nor are we appointed to manage the bodies we investigate. Our role is to report our opinion, our observations and recommendations to both houses of Parliament. And the last point I would like to make before inviting Ms. Agard and Mr. Ramnarayan to speak is to remind everyone that the objectives of this particular inquiry are multifaceted. While we want to ascertain the source or the reason for the minister's erroneous statement to Parliament on the 1st of November last year, that is not the sole focus. As was intimated on the last occasion, we are also interested in the need to draw attention about the dangers posed in data breaches and cyber attacks in both the public and private sectors. And we are also hoping to gain insight on what needs to be done to prevent future breaches, including perhaps the need for an updated legislative regime and the sort of support systems we should have in place. So let me begin by thanking both Ms. Agard and Mr. Ramnarayan for accepting our invitation to attend this morning and for providing this committee with very comprehensive submissions. Among other things, detailing some of the challenges facing the company, efforts that were made under their stewardship to bolster the company's position, their take on the recent cybersecurity incident, and the measures which were taken or not taken to address it. Now, I will ask each of you to give brief opening remarks. Members have already read your submissions, and I'm sure they're going to have questions on matters in need of clarification or expansion. So, may I invite Ms. Agard? Brief opening remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lisa Agard, and I really wish to thank the committee for this invitation. And I trust that my somewhat lengthy submission will be of assistance to you in your deliberations with regard to the cyber attack that was perpetrated against TSTT in October 2023. As the chairman has reminded members of this committee and the national audience, I am an attorney at law. I also have a Master's of Law degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and I also received executive management training from Columbia University, the Wharton School of Business, and INSEAD in Fontainebleau in France. The chairman reminded members of the committee, I do have 23 years of working experience in the telecommunications and broadcasting sectors. And after an extensive international search, I was appointed as CEO of TSTT in May 2021, having acted in the position since September 2020. As you can appreciate, the area of cybersecurity is a highly technical one. And in an organization such as TSTT, which is really a technology company, one has to place heavy reliance on the engineering and IT experts in the respective areas. As CEO, I relied on the networks and IT team, working alongside the reputational PR team in terms of crafting all communications during and after the cyber attack. This morning, I trust that attention will be focused at a minimum on 4 key areas. I do not have the benefit, unfortunately, of seeing the submission made by TSTT to this honorable committee, and so I can only rely on what was recorded publicly. So the first issue of focus should be, did TSTT misdirect, obfuscate in the Parliament on the 22nd of January in explaining the root cause of the cyber attack? I note that TSTT did not submit any reports to the committee from either Checkpoint or CyberEye, their international cybersecurity experts. So that question that I pose is important because of the emphasis placed on the access being gained through an external dealer network. And in that regard, I'd like to commend Member Sukai, who I think probed rather diligently on the issue of the root cause. So he stated, quote, "You stated that the breach actually came from one of your satellite operations, I believe using the GitLab platform." And Ms. Muller responded, quote, "Yes, so from our analysis, and we would have seen that, yes, the GitLab information was accessed via one of the dealer channel networks." And then after some further probing from Senator Sukai, she said, "So what would have happened? The threat actor would have been able to gain access to one of our admin passwords plus a password via the dealer channel, and that's how they would have been able to access our environment." However, as I submitted to the committee, there's an interim report from Checkpoint, which states very clearly on page 7, CPIRT, which is the Checkpoint Incident Response Team, was able to confirm one account being a primary source of malicious activity, TS Capri. This account not only escalated privileges on Mouth SCTRIX file server as early as October the 3rd, but also created multiple domain accounts, all with the same password, on October the 3rd, between 5:45 a.m. and 5:52 a.m. Members of the committee, this is a TSTT administrator working inside of TSTT, not an external party. But it raises, Chairman and members, some very alarming questions which TSTT must answer. One, I heard the chairman say the attack took place on the 9th. All reports to the board or minister or in public communications spoke of the incident occurring on the 9th of October 2023. However, it is clear that a significant breach and incursion happened on the 3rd of October 2023. When did TSTT know about the breach of the 3rd of October? Third, did the internal TSTT admin not realize that she had lost her credentials? That is a serious red flag in any IT organization. Was any report made by TS Capri or any escalation to anyone in IT? If yes, to whom was it reported and on what date? And finally, why was the CEO not told about this breach that occurred on the 3rd of October? Why did she have to see it in the Checkpoint interim report on the 10th of November? Why did all the communications to the CEO about the breach indicate that it occurred on the 9th of October? The second area of focus, which I realized that the committee spent a considerable amount of time on, was, did TSTT's CEO, me, Lisa Agard, mislead the Honorable Minister? In that regard, I invite this committee to look particularly at pages 54 to 59 of my submission. In apologizing to the Parliament for his misleading statement, which for the record, the Minister said was, TSTT's data and the data of its customers were not in any way compromised. That was the misleading statement. The Honorable Minister indicated that at all times, he based his response on, 1, information provided to me by the executive and or the board of TSTT, 2, TSTT's correspondence to its customers dated the 29th of October 2023, and 3, TSTT's public statement on cybersecurity dated October the 3rd, 2023. As CEO, I had one direct communication with the minister on the cybersecurity incident when his ministry asked me for an urgent response to a question on the 1st of November 2023. In the response that I sent directly to the minister via WhatsApp and to several other people, including the chairman of TSTT, there is absolutely no mention whatsoever of TSTT's data and the data of its customers not in any way being compromised. Let me repeat that. In the statement prepared for the Honorable Minister to respond to the question in Parliament, there was absolutely no mention of TST's data and the data of its customers not in any way being compromised. TSTT's press release of the 30th of October, when TSTT said there was no loss or compromise of customer data, TSTT specifically and very importantly qualified that statement. And of course, that was based on information provided by the networks and IT team. And that qualification is very significant because TSTT said when no loss or compromise of customer data means that no data was deleted from TSTT's databases or manipulated. That, to my knowledge, remains the case to today. The minister, in making his statement on the 1st, never qualified or clarified his statement as TSTT had in its press release of the 30th. So as a consequence of which, Chairman and members, I did not mislead the minister. The minister quoted at length from a letter he purportedly had, which was circulated to a small number of enterprise customers and signed by Darrell Duke, the Assistant General Manager of Business in TSTT. Given its limited circulation, it's difficult to envisage how the minister came to be in possession of the letter on the 1st of November. At the very least, I can communicate clearly to this committee that it never came from the office of the CEO because I never saw that letter until about the 10th of November. But apart from that significant fact, there is something in the letter which is critical. In communicating to TSTT's enterprise customers that their data and information had not been compromised, TSTT was referring to customer data and information in the commercial cloud, which was not subject to any cyber attack. It was TSTT's private virtual cloud that was subject to the cyber attack. And unfortunately, in relying on that letter, somebody should have explained to the minister the difference between the commercial cloud and the private cloud. Apparently, no one did. Unfortunate. The third area of focus, did Mr. Weston, TSTT's acting CEO, intentionally and maliciously mislead the committee when he said that it was the CEO's office that misled the minister? And in that regard, I invite the committee to look specifically at pages 58 to 60 of my submission. And I think Senator Wade Mark, you were the one who were very pointed in your inquiry of Mr. Weston. You asked him, quote, "Are you telling this committee that as far as you are aware, that in this instance of that particular communication that was read into the parliamentary record by the Honorable Minister, as far as you are aware, that that came from the office of the Chief Executive Officer who is no longer employed in TSTT? Is that what you're telling this committee?" His response, quote unquote, "Yes, Honorable Member, I would state, in my view, that the office that would issue that instruction or that notification would be the office of the CEO," quote unquote. In light of the above outline of the facts, as I have established, it is clear beyond any doubt that the CEO did not mislead the Honorable Minister, and Mr. Weston's statement to the contrary is a complete fabrication and deception for which he ought to be made to apologize publicly, particularly as he has all of the information in his possession. And then the final area I would like the committee to focus on, if I may be so indulged, is generally the communication around the cybersecurity incident. And in that regard, I invite the committee to review in particular pages 60 to 66 of my submission, and also pages 42 to 43. Let me say at the outset, TSTT communicated what it knew when it became aware of it, guided at all times by the networks and IT teams, and issued statements prepared by the brand reputation PR department. When you look at the details of my submissions, you have to ask yourself, why did the CEO have to literally beg the chairman and the board of TSTT to be allowed to communicate with the public after the 6th of November? Since by that date, I was mandated to get prior approval of the chairman and the board before anything was allowed to be said publicly. The most important part of that, though, however, is that a comprehensive communications plan was prepared to inform affected customers. Customers were segmented into different categories: ministers, parliamentarians, permanent secretaries, enterprise customers, and the general public. The board only approved communication to everyone except the general public, claiming that it would strain the resources of the contact center, among other things. In any event, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, no aspect of the communication plan was ever implemented. Why is that? And Mr. Member Mark, had you been communicated with directly, you would have no concern about whether your credit card information was out there or that email communication was out there. You would know exactly what of your personal identification information was part of the 6 gig of data that was exfiltrated. And so therefore, it is disingenuous in my humble submission for TSTT, through the chairman, the acting CEO, and the brand reputation unit that reports to the operations and admin department, to communicate publicly that, quote unquote, we need to reshape the conversation with customers around transparency in communication, something that we agree needed to be done differently, and that the timeliness of the communication collaboration with right experts, quoted, end of quote. If, as TSTT now claims, it wishes to be transparent and timely in its communication with customers, then why was the communication plan to the general public not implemented? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for the length of my opening statement, but I thought that these are some key areas that the committee would want to focus on, having read the transcript of what transpired on the 22nd of January.
Thank you very much, Ms. Egod. Mr. Ramnarayan.
Honorable Chairman and members of the Joint Select Committee, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to address you today. I hope this session serves as a platform for uncovering and understanding the various aspects that would have influenced the outcome of the recent cyber attack at TSTT. As you know, I'm the former CFO of TSTT. The Networks and IT Department of TSTT does not fall within my direct remit. However, as a senior executive, I would have had privy to information and that should prove useful to this committee. I make these representations faithfully and truthfully today in the interest of public accountability and to assist this committee in its deliberations to uncover the truth about this incident. While cyber attacks are increasingly common worldwide, typically involving advanced hackers breaching top-tier corporate defenses, this cyber incident at TSTT was different. Based on the information our CEO had just described, it involves unauthorized access through a specific administrator's laptop. This breach led to the creation of numerous accounts, which went undetected for 6 days. Upon discovery, the Networks and IT department began to deflect blame from themselves and begin to distort the truth and conceal information. This incident initially took place on October 3rd, but was only noticed by the Networks and IT team when it caused the shutdown of the interconnected systems and applications. A series of actions were then taken by the Networks and IT department, unfortunately, to miscommunicate and misrepresent what took place. In parallel, the CEO communicated with the chairman and the board of directors based on the information that was made available to her by the communications team. The CEO also developed a communications plan to address the concerns of customers and the public. As you just heard from the former CEO, the plan was not approved in its entirety by the board for implementation. My hope in that our discussions today will expose the underlying root causes of this cyber event and highlight the significant shortcomings within the Networks and IT department and elsewhere that permitted such a breach. I hope that this committee can examine the surrounding actions taken by several parties to deflect responsibility and to evade accountability regarding this unfortunate event. It would therefore be important for this committee to probe and investigate the following issues that transpired. The underlying causes of the cyber incursion and the poor response from the Networks and IT team, which instead of being transparent, chose to deflect blame, conceal truth, and spread false narratives about imaginary spending requests not being approved by the former CFO. Conduct a review of the actions of the board in this matter and their culpability in failing to discharge their fiduciary duty to TSTT by not acting expeditiously to correct the initial miscommunication by the minister. Let me repeat that. An initial miscommunication by a minister has led us to where we are today in a joint select committee. This is the minimum which any right-thinking professional or body could be expected to carry out. The current acting CEO, Kent Weston, and his relationship with the chairman also needs to be probed, and his influence on the board of directors as he navigated his survival and his ambitions during his extended probation at TSTT. His efforts at that time to undermine the process during the cyber attack. The adversarial relationship existing between the board and the senior management at that time, the former CEO and the former CFO, myself. As you heard and as you've seen in the submissions, to address the potential going concern qualifications by the external auditors and the company's difficulty in meeting its financial obligations, both the former CEO and myself were pursuing profitability at TSTT. Much to the discord and much to the misalignment of the board, who was more focused on maintaining the status quo. I hope we probe into that a lot more today. Very important to me is the deliberate disinformation, and I use the word disinformation, not misinformation, to highlight the intent to deceive, which included false narratives and disclosures spread by some of the members of management today. In particular, Mr. Sandor Smith, GM Networks and IT at the time, and as I said, his imaginary request for spending on cybersecurity, which resulted in numerous newspaper articles, union publications. As you all know, many companies have been victims of cyber attack. However, this cyber event at TSTT must be differentiated from such high-level sophisticated attacks. One can even question whether this attack arose out of sheer incompetence or was intentionally facilitated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ramnarayan. So I'm going to, well, first let me welcome Member Leonce, who's just joined us. Thank you. I'm going to invite Member Sukai to have first question.
Chair, thank you very much. Thank you, team, for your gracious introduction into this matter in particularly. And I mean, given the whole scenario of how it played off and seeing that it wasn't the first incident of data breach, I know that there was one in 2022, I believe, right? Could you just give an account how 2022 was different from this last breach, and what measures were put into place when it happened in 2022, right? And how this particular incident was able to seep through the cracks in a sense. Maybe it'll just give us a better understanding, because 2022 would have given us sort of a, to raise the bar and standard in terms of security and data protection, because we already had a first breach. Was it that we didn't pay attention to certain reporting from Checkpoint? And who and my follow-up to that question is that, is there someone responsible to manage this data that is collected? Is there a portfolio of an individual within TSTT that manages this data? And the data that is harvested, who owns that data? So it's three questions, basically.
Thank you, Honorable Member, for that quite important question. So the cyber incursion that occurred in 2022 was very similar to this one, in that it was a ransomware attack, and again, based on advice from Checkpoint, which, by the way, had been in TSTT prior to 2022. I'm not quite sure how Ms. Tanya Muller didn't know that. And as I said, very similar. What was different this time around was the exfiltration of data and its public release. Following the incident in 2022, as you know, there's a international best response to incidents of this nature. I've set it out in my submission, where you try to recover, you try to limit the impact of the threat actors. And because, as you know, one of the biggest issues when you have cyber attacks is denial of service, whether your customers can even make calls or access the internet, and loss of data and exfiltration of data. So after 2022, we engaged Checkpoint in a much deeper and meaningful way. They made a lot of recommendations to us to purchase additional or enhanced platforms, some of which already existed in TSTT. The CFO will tell you that we brought in addition, because obviously Checkpoint is an international company that is in the business of cybersecurity. And as a check on exactly what they were recommending to TSTT, we brought in Ernst & Young to advise us on all of the platforms that were being recommended to us by Checkpoint.
So just to put a little stop in there, because I just want to come back to the point of the first breach. Was it somewhat similar in nature to 2023 breach?
Yes.
In other words, was it an external terminal or satellite branch that it was able to infiltrate and then infect? Was that the catalyst, similar to what happened in 2023?
So I cannot recollect if it was internal or external to TSTT. I do believe in that instance it was external, because Checkpoint, to my recollection, never produced a final report that pinpointed the root cause of that attack.
So then did it use also the GitLab platform
No,
to be able
from
to
my recollection,
So
no.
it wasn't the GitLab in this
No,
case.
no.
But however, the GitLab, to enter the GitLab, you had to have an admin
A
password.
password, yes.
Who uses the GitLab platform?
Well, it would really only be the IT department. So
Which
to be
is
clear,
management within TSTT.
yes. So the GitLab is a place where TSTT stores source code information. So any applications, just for chairman and members of the public who may be listening, sometimes a company develops applications. TSTT has several of its own homegrown applications. The source codes for those applications would be stored in the GitLab.
Okay, so GitLab was like a database for your source codes.
Yes.
Okay, so therefore, the only way you could use your source code is that they are unique to TSTT because you all tailored the source code, the software, or the coding for your purposes.
Yes, so
Right.
it's for
It's internal.
TSTT
Correct.
own homegrown application.
So then-
and there are several.
But then the GitLab, so in those, that software program would have had a database where you collected certain information on
Well, source code information
Source code
only.
all right.
Only. And that is why Senator Sukai, through you, Mr. Chair, I apologize. I was very intrigued by the answers given and the emphasis on this external data on the GitLab when it was clear from the checkpoint report that that was not the primary source of the intrusion, that it was this admin's account and credentials that was stolen.
So this admin is internal.
Yes.
How, because to my understanding, this password has been, and from the last interview that we had with TSTT, this password has been like that for the longest while. It looked like it has never been changed. Is it common practice to have a password, especially an admin password, run for so long without having it renewed?
Senator Sukai, you have an advantage over me because I did not have sight of what TSTT actually prepared for this committee. So I do not know if they indicated that the password hadn't been changed for some time. But this is an administrator credentials. An administrator is locked out of their credentials. That is the biggest red flag. Any of your technical people here would tell you that is the biggest red flag in any IT environment. And the question is, when was that known and what was done? Because those credentials were hacked. They were able to create multiple new credentials using the administrator's password.
So, Chair, then that will then ask then, because again, we understand it was an admin password
Yes.
that was hacked.
Yes.
And then you were able to
Create
multiply.
multiple
Right.
new credentials.
Right.
Yes.
So, checkpoint, how often, like, does it do a round robin check as to what activity is going on into the system? And why I ask this, right? My brother works for an organization internationally that monitors emails. And if an email is sent to an external or personal, that is from within the
Yes.
company and goes outside, they're supposed to send reports regularly as to such activities. So which means activities like this could be tracked. Is it that in a report, because this seems to have been going on for a while, that they had such information? It's just that during this period, they exacerbated the process to do their extraction. Am I correct?
So
Did any flags been raised?
So as I said through you, Mr. Chairman, I do not, yes, there are monitoring platforms in TSTT. As a matter of fact, that would have been one of the recommendations coming out of Checkpoint in 2022. And by the way, I want, before the CFO, I see he's anxious to respond and to provide some input. $22 million was spent after the incident in 2022. $22 million. That does not include money spent on the Ernst & Young, and it also does not include the cyber audit that was done by KPMG. So just to put that on the table, KPMG came in and said, Ernst & Young came in and said, you have a lot of capability and a lot of platforms in TSTT already that are not being optimally utilized. You do not need to buy additional platforms. That capability already exists. So to your question about monitoring capability, that is definitely something that is part of the portfolio of operations of the IT department. And you're right to probe who was monitoring the IT networks.
So then, sorry to cut you, Chair. This is before last question. Then, so since it is probed, then, or it's you have the
Yes.
you have the capability,
Yes.
and it comes back again. Do you have then an executive manager that manages data, that will overlook data? Because in terms of data collection, there's always an owner to the data, who owns the data, and then who manages that data.
Well, data is generated through you, Mr. Chair, data is generated, as you can imagine, from multiple platforms within TSTT. So the question of who owns the data will very much depend on who manages that particular
And that's why I'm
aspect of
asking,
the
is there a
network.
person in that?
So let me just say generally, the Networks and IT department in TSTT comprises 222 employees out of the establishment count of 602. By far, the largest division in TSTT. I was also surprised that they were not able to answer, I think it was Member Indassing's question about whether IT staff had been laid off and if that contributed to lack of monitoring or lack of capability in terms of discharge of responsibilities. I'm surprised at the answer because the IT team in TSTT was left largely intact after the last restructuring.
So then, Chair, just last thing, through your reports, again, I ask, did this admin password come up as a red flag saying that it has never been changed? Or is that a normal procedure like in your risk analysis? Because you will have a risk assessment. Did that ever come up?
No, it did not. To my knowledge, it did not, Honorable Member.
So I wasn't looking to cut you short, Member Sukai. I just wanted to invite Mr. Ramnarayan, because I see he's been patiently waiting to say something in answer to your question.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm just going to add to Honorable Member a couple of things. Lisa sort of wrapped up a lot in what she said, but I wanted to sort of bring home a couple of key points, Honorable Member. The modus operandi that existed back in 2022 and 2023 is synonymous. Both myself and the former CEO was not the recipient of information. In fact, what transpired was that the networks and IT team delegated much of the responsibility to Checkpoint in determining the issue, reporting the issue, providing the remediation efforts. Now, former CEO also mentioned there was no loss of employees in that area, over 222, which I would tell you it's almost twice the size of our competitor in the networks and IT department. So it's not for the lack of resources. Talk a little bit about what controls, which is what you probed into. Standard controls, ignoring TSTT, standard controls would be if user accounts are going to be created, normal control in any environment, it would be created between 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock. So anything that happens outside of that, if there is a rogue infiltration that is creating user accounts, would be flagged. The systems as well that you have, that you don't need to create imaginary requests to say you didn't get the funding for it, that you currently have, should be configured to flag those, especially if user accounts are being created. And if the Checkpoint report was read or provided, you would see multiple user accounts were created within minutes.
Yep.
So 222 people, systems that you have currently that you're not operating, Why? Because in TSTT, in the Networks and IT department, which is why we have a discord between myself and them, all responsibilities are delegated to vendors. There is no subject matter expertise that sits here. I paid attention to the Joint Select discussion, and I saw it for myself. I saw the misrepresentations. I saw the deflections. I saw the dishonesty with some of the responses. But to answer your question, those controls in any other environment, any other competent environment would have been able to trap that.
So, Chair, just to break it down, right? And just to expand on this, because it's a very important point.
But briefly, because Member Mark is waiting, and then Member...
But just to expand on this, if you're going to simply create even a Hotmail account, or any account, or Gmail account, whatever, you send your credentials first, and then you wait for approvals for your account to be created. So therefore, there's an administrator that does that. These accounts that were created, were they waiting to be approved, or how were they approved, or how did that happen then? Because if it's that, I think 22 accounts that were created during that period so quickly, was there approval, is there due diligence before you allow creation of these accounts, or is just something that bypasses in the system?
That would definitely be an interesting question for the Networks and IT department, because there should be a hierarchical approval process. However, they were mirroring, in my lack of technical expertise, a network administrator account. So they had all access.
Thank you, Chair.
Member Mark.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Ms. Agard, welcome. And welcome to Mr. Shiva, right? And the others. Ms. Agard, as the former CEO of TSTT, could you explain to this committee, because I mystify myself, why a malware incursion would take place at TSTT on the 3rd of October and not on the 9th, as reports have indicated. And based on your submission, you have indicated to this committee that you were not aware until the 22nd of November, based on some checkpoint report. I find that astonishing. And I would really like to know, as the former CEO, what occurred between the 3rd and the 9th, when it was formally brought out, and then later on, you were only brought into the picture on November the 22nd. Could you explain to this committee what was the reason? Did you conduct an investigation subsequently to find out why you as CEO was not brought into the picture?
Thank you, Honorable Member, for that question, and through you, Mr. Chairman. That is a question, I think, that is more properly directed at TSTT. No one told me that there was a breach on the 3rd of October. I never found out until I got the checkpoint report on the 11th of October, not the 22nd, on the 11th of October. And, Honorable Member, unfortunately, I had no opportunity to make any inquiry or investigation, because by the 14th of October, I was gone.
Is it October or November?
Sorry, November. I was gone. So, Chairman, you ought to direct that question to TSTT, because in every single report, whether prepared for the Board of Directors of TSTT, whether prepared even for the National Security Council of Trinidad and Tobago, all public communications spoke to the event occurring on the 9th of October. I suspect, member, that having the checkpoint report, which spoke to a major breach occurring on the 3rd, they had no choice but to include that in their submissions to this honorable committee. Because when you saw the checkpoint report, and of course I don't know what's in the CyberEye report, I would imagine that the CyberEye report would contain similar information. I don't know, never saw it.
Ms. Agard, there, in the checkpoint report, it speaks to an admin account.
Yes.
I, as an ordinary layman, take it to mean, rather, that is the account of an employee
Yes.
of TSTT.
Yes.
I would like you to tell this committee and our chairman, is that employee one still on the job? That's the first question. The second question, was that employee ever interrogated by TSTT to find out how that person's account was breached by these cyber criminals in the first instance and created, as you indicated a short while ago, multiple accounts within 7 minutes? I think Mr. Shiva said it was sometime between in the evening period,
Morning,
after the
early morning.
early morning period, as opposed to the evening period. Could you explain to this committee what was done by TSTT and your office, if anything at all, to interrogate the particular admin employee, one, and two, this external device, which is secondary to the whole process, and the dealership involved in this exercise? Was that dealer or dealership also interrogated by TSTT? Because these are the two red flags that have been erected by Checkpoint. So could you explain to this committee what, if anything, occurred? And are these people still functioning as dealers, as a dealer? And is the worker or the admin staff still employed at TSTT networks and ITT division or unit?
Thank you so very much for that question, member, and through you, Mr. Chairman. As far as I am aware, the person is still employed with TSTT. That is the answer to your first question. With regard to any investigation being done by TSTT in relation to the loss of this employee's credentials, as far as I'm aware, no investigation was done in relation to this employee's loss of credentials. And thirdly, I think your third question related to whether the dealer network had been interrogated. Similarly, as far as I'm aware, Mr. Chairman, no such investigation was carried out in the dealer network. The machine that was the suspected machine utilized at the dealer location was retrieved, and I think data and logs were taken from it and sent to Checkpoint for forensic analysis.
Mr. Agard, would you wish to share the name of that person with the chairman of our committee and our committee? Or do you think that you want to do that privately? Because it is important that this committee thoroughly and comprehensively get to the bottom of this matter. We don't want to leave anything hazy and ambiguous.
So Member Mark?
I'm asking whether...
And just with you, if you do know the name and identity, if you could provide that to the committee in writing, please, not on air.
Right. No, so that is a very important issue that we are dealing with. Now, can you also tell this committee what is the line of reporting in an instance where you or myself as an admin or administrator, my account is penetrated by cybercrime criminals. If that happens, who do I report to? What is the line of communication as it relates to reporting? You report to X, whose office is Y. Y reports to Z, and then Z now reports to the CEO. What is the line of reporting when something like this happens at TSTT? Can you explain this to the committee?
Well, the administrator in this particular instance would report to a line manager. I don't know who that person is. But ultimately, the reporting would go up to the senior manager, IT infrastructure, who is Ms. Tanya Muller. She appeared before the committee on the 22nd of January. And ultimately as well to the general manager, networks and IT, who throughout this incident was Sandor Smith. That is the reporting, Honorable Member.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, there's another matter I'd like to raise during my first round here, and that has to deal with confidentiality. Mr. Egad, as the former CEO, is there a confidentiality policy in TSTT? I would like to know this because there are issues raised in the submission by Ms. Egad, which I would like to interrogate. But I first need you to explain to this committee, Ms. Egad, is there a confidentiality policy at TSTT? And what is the firewall between the board of directors and management when coming to customer, private, confidential data? That is why I'm asking this question as it relates to confidentiality. Can you explain to this committee?
Sure. Thank you, Honorable Member, for that question. So confidentiality within TSTT and the requirement to keep customer information in particular confidential is not only found in policy, but actually is a requirement under the Telecommunications Act, read in tandem with the concession that is issued to all operators in the telecom sector. You have to read both of them together to understand. So yes, in law, there's an obligation to keep customers' information confidential, and generally there are confidentiality provisions in TSTT. There are confidentiality provisions in contracts of employment with employees.
Thank you, Ms. Egad. Let me just continue. If that is so, could you provide to this committee, to the chairman, a copy? No, well, I can't say you because you're no longer there. I'll have to reserve that. Let me go on further. Could you explain to this committee and its chairman how you, as former CEO, could have been asked to provide, according to your submission, a credit card information of over 500 customers, which was demanded of you through the corporate secretary by the chairman of the board of TSTT. And you dutifully complied because I think they give you a certain time frame where you have to go on the dark web or wherever you have to go to get this information. And you provided, according to your submission, a spreadsheet of over 500 names of customers, credit card. I might have been a victim of that because I used my credit card to settle a matter with TSTT through AV Knowles. And I want to know if there's a confidentiality policy at TSTT, how come citizens' credit card details were passed on to the chairman and by extension, the entire board of directors of TSTT? Mr. Chairman, this is a more serious and egregious issue, and I would like some clarification from the distinguished former CEO on this matter, please.
So thank you so much, member, for that question. And through you, Chair, it's not 500 people whose bank account information or credit card information. There were really only 33 instances where there was either credit card or bank account information. And if you go to, I think it's page 41 of my submission, you will see where basically I have said that out of the 33, only 18 had bank account numbers, and some of those fell into categories where there was no customer name or no bank account identified, right? So I went into the details of that. And by the way, these were screenshots of online transactions. So in our discussions with one of the commercial banks, they indicated that it was very difficult for anybody to access someone's online account because they would have to know their username, their password, a PIN, and if dual authentication was in place, an SMS. So as a consequence of that, the cyber experts advised us that there wasn't any heightened additional risk of fraudulent activity as a result of the bank account or credit card information that was leaked as part of the 6 gig of data. So I want to make that point. It was only 33. But Honorable Member, I was asked to provide the information, and the only way that I could provide the very specific information that was requested of me was to actually produce that spreadsheet and send it to the board of directors through the chairman.
What I'm asking through the chairman, Ms. Agard, from a confidentiality point of view, where there's a screenshot, whether it is limited information, I'm just asking, under the Data Protection Act of the Republic of TNT and those sections that have been proclaimed, my private and personal data and the data of any citizen doing business with TSTT is highly protected under law. I am asking the question, how can a chairman or a board of directors demand of you as CEO to produce this information, just supposing that the information was more detailed and not as scanty as you have just indicated? Would you have complied in contradiction to the confidentiality policy, in contradiction to that law that you mentioned, in contradiction to the concessions that were granted and that guide this thing, in contradiction to whatever confidentiality policy of TTSD? I am asking a question, Mr. Chairman. What business is it of a chairman of a board of directors demanding of a CEO, you or any other CEO, the provision of citizens, customers, credit card information? That is my concern, and whether there should not be a firewall between a board of directors and the management when it comes to protecting the private and confidential data of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. That is what I'm concerned about, ma'am. And maybe you may want to recommend a policy, a recommendation for consideration.
So Member Mark,
Mr. President, Mr. Chair.
if I could just add to your concern, I think Member Mark has a broader concern, which is it possible and would it be proper for members of the board of TSTT to have access to the personal, private, and confidential information of the users and the clients of TSTT? Is there a firewall? Is there a Chinese wall? I think that's one of the things he's driving at.
So I would say in this particular case, there is no firewall. You will appreciate, having read my submission in detail, as I'm sure you have, that I was under considerable pressure from this board, particularly after the 6th of November, when after a board meeting, I was told I could not communicate with the general public without prior approval of the chairman of the board. And there was a mad request for a lot of information to be supplied to the board. And I think, having regard to all of the circumstances, I felt that if I did not cooperate and provide the information as requested, that my own position as CEO would have been in jeopardy. And so therefore, I reluctantly complied with all of the requests for information that was asked of me by the board of directors.
Mr. Chairman, one final question as I close off. Madam Ms. Lisa Egard, can I ask sincerely and frankly of you whether the inability of the staff in the network and ITT unit not to bring you up to speed with this incursion which took place on the 3rd of October. Can you share with this committee whether this inability to communicate with you as the former CEO by this particular section of TSTT, could that have been interpreted as an attempt to undermine the operations of TSTT? And I also have an additional rider to this because it is causing me some concern. And I would like you to be very frank and open because it is of concern to me. Was there, from your opinion as former CEO, a clear attempt by internal forces and external forces combined or working in unison to undermine the TSTT as an institution, as an operation? And you and Mr. Shiva Ramnarayan were statistics in the process. But the overarching objective would be to undermine, compromise, subvert, and maybe just weaken this institution called the TSTT. I am not too sure. It is something that is bothering me.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for that question. I will let Mr. Ramnarayan opine. I think the answer to that question is really a matter for this committee to determine. My purpose here today is to simply provide the committee with facts and information as I know them. It is for this committee to draw inferences, come to conclusions as a consequence of the facts that I have presented. It may well be that you conclude that there's an inescapable inference that there was undermining taking place in the organization by the way the networks and IT team responded to this entire situation. But I would prefer not to make that comment myself publicly, but leave it for this committee to make such a determination.
Through the chair, honourable member, I will dovetail a little bit more on that conversation, and allow me some latitude. TSTT, when I joined, shortly before Lisa Agard in her position as CEO, was a loss-making company. It had amassed almost $3 billion in debt by the previous CFO. So TSTT was looking for talent at that point in time, and I would extend it. It's not just a $3 billion debt. A $3 billion debt would accrue $300 million thereabout in interest. So you must understand that where the profitability of that company was going to go. At the same time, the company was losing about $1 billion in revenue, just by the nature of the industry. At TSTT, one of the first things, the first order of the day, was to look at the financials. And it was clear to me at that point, which I brought to the audit chair at that point in time in 2019, that TSTT was operating at a cash loss position, what you call an operating loss of $30 million on a monthly basis. That's $360 million a year. So there was no continuity for TSTT in the future. Harsh decisions needed to be made. The decisions that was taken at that point in time was a shock to the culture of TSTT. Simple decisions. What you hear in the public domain, in the utterances of the union, is that spending was cut. That's false. Spending was never cut. There was a robust process now to manage spending. Vendors were brought in to negotiate their rates. Certain rates, and this is where I'm getting into the conversation, so please allow me the latitude. Certain rates, for example, $90 an hour. We brought in Ernst & Young to look at that. Ernst & Young said market rate is $50 an hour. Vendors' profitability moved down by $36 million. TSTT saved $36 million on that one transaction. Was there animosity between vendor TSTT? People imposed at TSTT working with those vendors? Absolutely. Relationships with board members and those vendors? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one example. I could give you countless examples. The former CEO knows very well the threats that I would have received from vendors, indirectly, directly. So when we talk about undermining, yes, but it was a cultural paradigm shift that TSTT was not able to make, and as a result, people within the networks and IT department, which was their largest spend. Let me give you some KPIs. When I joined, networks and IT costs was roughly 14 to 15% of revenue. That's higher than industry average. That's spending. The example that the CEO gave earlier about bringing in Ernst & Young to review Checkpoint. Networks and IT brought to the CEO and myself a spend.
$10 million, I think it was.
We said, we'll have Ernst & Young look at it. When Ernst & Young came in, Ernst & Young said, redundancy upon redundancy upon redundancy. And that was cut in half. That's the culture. That was a shock when people like myself walked in and said, no. We could optimize wastage. We could stop the unnecessary spending. But these are legacy vendors with persons working at TSTT, in the networks and IT department and elsewhere, for more than 20 years. Think about those relationships. So were we undermined? Absolutely. We were the new kids in the block looking to change a company, doing it at the opposition of the board. And this is something I want to make absolutely clear so that everyone is certain about what I'm saying here. Where else in the world, I wouldn't even use Trinidad and Tobago, in the world, does a CFO and CEO walk up to the board and say, hey, listen, we need to cut costs. We need to optimize wastage. And it is met without favor. It is met with discord. We now have to justify why we want to cut cost. Bizarre, to say the least. And any other company I've worked for, it's the other way around. The board, shareholders asking you to cut cost. But in TSTT, no. This was met with resistance. So to answer your question directly around undermining, yes, it was at every front, at the board level. And I can go into a lot of details. Through the chair, do I have the opportunity? Because I would like to use specific examples.
Briefly, but I'm also concerned about, in the course of your delivery, not to name any particular individual. You could always provide us
Sure.
in writing.
Sure.
Okay?
Most recent, because it's close to my departure, we had negotiated a contract through proper procurement process, awarding a vendor, which I will not call names, an award for the delivery of a service, $3.7 million cheaper than the incumbent. And I should add, the incumbent had the business for over 15 years, give or take, at $22 million. So we moved from 22 million down to 13 million, thereabouts. When we went out to tender, much to the discord of everyone at TSTT and the board, it was brought down. The incumbent was 16, became the successful tenderer came in at 12.7, so 3.7 thereabouts. In accordance with the procurement rules, it took a board member involvement now to get involved, discuss with the chairman, and have the CEO write a memo to justify that.
Chair, is this before the OPR? If you don't
This
mind
is
me asking.
after the OPR,
This is
in
after.
contravention to the procurement legislation, making false accusations about the successful vendor. Other examples, and I gave, so that's two. I have a third example. We have had persons use emergency spend requests in order to bypass the process. And that's something I know, it's something that TSTT management, if they are so inclined, should be very careful about with the absence of myself and the former CEO. We have a member on that board of directors who has a company who was the successful recipient of contracts through emergency spend. That was stopped during my tenure. Stopped. Because you need 3 bidders. You can't prove that it's an emergency. I may not be technical, but you have to prove now that that's an emergency for you to get through with that. These were some of the practices, and obviously that created issues with myself and that board member. In fact, at my last board meeting, one of the accusations, which I felt was baseless and it was not advanced by the board member, was that I did not spend on the Nelson exchange. Now, there's a swivel and a pivot there, because first I was not spending on the imaginary expenses for security. Now I'm not spending on the Nelson exchange by the director. I reminded the director that there should be facts. What evidence do you have? She eventually closed that case. She said, well, not going to pursue it. But again, it shows to the honorable member, where is a director who sits on a board, gets information about the Nelson exchange spending requirements? Who is that director speaking with? She clearly does not work at the Nelson exchange. And in the capacity of a board member in a boardroom, asking about spending at the Nelson exchange, accusing the CFO of not spending. If you read the article on January 14th, you would realize that's been rubbished. There is no facts that finance or myself ever refused any spending on the Nelson exchange. The undermining, not factual, honorary member, but it is a pervasive narrative. Why? Because of a cultural shock that TSTT could not make that shift.
Member Indarsing has been patiently waiting, but just to summarize what I'm hearing from you, TSTT was experiencing significant revenue decline because of a number of things. Poor fiscal management culture, an industry shift from switch voice calling, competitors expanding their services to include fixed fiber broadband. And when you all came on board, there was a 3-phase containment plan. That's what you said, right? Non-personnel cost cuts, contract reviews, vendor negotiations, maintenance expenditure, personnel reduction. And that started to yield significant enhancement in the company's financial performance. But that also yielded some pushback. And so that is what you are saying could have given this undercutting aspect, yeah?
Correct. Correct, Honorable
Thank
Chairman.
you. Member Indorsing.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and let me take the opportunity to thank both Ms. Agard and Mr. Ramnarine for your respective submissions to this committee. It has been, in my opinion, very detailed and eye-opening for me, given my role on this committee. And I have some questions for Ms. Agard and Mr. Ramnarine. Very quickly, Ms. Agard, you responded to my colleague, Member Mark, and to an extent, and I just want for you to clarify, because you was the CEO of this organization. A malware incursion occurred on the 3rd. Within the organizational structure, such an incursion should have been brought to your attention, from me, immediately by the Senior Manager of IT Infrastructure and the General Manager of Networks and IT. That should have been red flagged and brought to your attention immediately. In your opinion, why was there a delay, and was it done deliberately to undermine your office?
Thank you so much, Member, for that question. I can only surmise as to the reason why it was not brought to my attention. Because as I said, I became aware of it when I got the checkpoint interim report. It was never communicated to me by the networks and IT team in any form and in any way. So perhaps the question is better directed to TSTT as to why it was that I, as CEO, I was not informed that in fact a major breach had occurred on the 3rd of October.
But given your knowledge of the organizational structure, being the CEO at the time, there is a reporting responsibility.
Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, whether it is in written, is it in written form?
It could be by email or it could be by virtual meeting. It could take many forms, Member.
Okay. In addition to that, and it continues to be a bit mind-boggling to me, you indicated that you was debarred from communicating with the public by the, just for refreshing my memory, by the chairman of the board?
By the chairman of the board, yes, and I presume the board, because it was communicated to me after a board meeting on the 6th of November. So I could not communicate without prior approval of the chairman.
Okay. And based on what transpired in the parliament of the country, based on a question that was posed by my parliamentary colleague and a supplemental question that was pursued by my by myself. Based on what we have heard about you being debarred from communicating with the public and so on, and if I could recollect very clearly in reading your submission and your opening statement to this committee this morning, you stated very clearly that you did not mislead the minister. So if you did not mislead the minister, who at TSTT provided this information to the minister to put into the public domain in the parliament, in the proceedings of the parliament, and who misled the minister at TSTT?
Through you,
Member?
Mr. Chair, I can't say.
Yeah, member, if I may help you, because when I read through Ms. Agard's submissions, this is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the mystery was cleared up this way. And I will use the language of Mr. Ramnarine, that when the minister misspoke, that initial miscommunication, it was because he stepped outside of the brief that had actually been given to him by TSTT. When you asked about the earlier incursion in March 2022, which was the incursion 7 months prior in your supplemental question, an incursion during which no data was compromised, the minister presumed it would appear, without having actually been so advised by TSTT in respect of the October incursion. He conflated the two as the same, when in fact they were not. And in the process, inadvertently giving the impression that he was either deliberately misleading the House, or he had been misled or been misadvised by TSTT. But it's also clear that the minister wasn't being untruthful when he said he was quoting from a TSTT statement, except it was the wrong statement. It was a statement previously given by TSTT in relation to that earlier cyber incident, or from an earlier press release that had been sent out by TSTT on the 30th of October 2023, or from that letter you spoke of, which had limited circulation. So it would seem to me, and tell me if I've gotten it wrong, that the statement, and you said that the statement which was actually prepared for the minister, there was no mention of TSTT's data and the data of customers not in any way being compromised. But one might say that in his haste to allay fears, to give assurances to the public, the minister scored an own goal. And just to be clear, the statement which was prepared for the minister was not written by you, Ms. Agard, but by the company's management, reputation management and PR team, working in tandem with the company's networks and IT teams, which you approved without making changes.
That's correct.
Is there anything else to add, or have I gotten it?
No. And the only thing that I would add to your excellent summary, Mr. Chairman, is that I prepared a statement issued to the media to clarify what the minister said on the 1st of November. That was written on the 6th of November, to go out and explain to the public this characterization that the minister made on the 1st. That went to the board, and the board refused to approve its public release.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your clarification on this particular issue. I have some other questions, but I want to go to Mr. Ramnarine, and I'm sure other colleagues will also have questions. Mr. Ramnarine, you indicated and to us today that you were the source of threats from vendors in your attempt to bring what you would term, or I may term, financial sanity to TSTT. Could you indicate to this meeting, during your tenure as the CFO, did you in any way attempt to block the necessary financing or funding that was needed for the development of cybersecurity plans and roadmaps at TSTT?
Honorable Member, through the Chair, I can say categorically no. In no instance, as it related to cybersecurity, was any spending restricted. In fact, the newspaper article on January 14th or 16th, forgive me if I'm incorrect, would have highlighted that all requested cybersecurity tools and requests for spending was approved. In fact, the amount that was approved was not spent by the time I had left. It was still in train to be spent. So approved even before and not utilized.
And in addition to that, based on the incursion that occurred in March of 2022, just for the benefit of this committee, how much was spent to develop what we would call roadmaps as it relates to the cybersecurity incursion that occurred at that point in time?
The request that was approved was circa 24 million. 22 million.
Okay. And I have one question to ask you again, because I've heard this, you referred to threats from vendors, the apparent interference of board members or board member into the, what we may term the day-to-day and daily operations of TSTT and so on. You departed from TSTT. Were you were fired or did you resign from TSTT?
Honorable Member, through the Chair, TSTT made a decision to terminate my employment for termination for no reason. It's a clause that I specifically requested be put into my contract, and that is to ensure that in the case of hostility, animosity, or any other types of issues that may arise, that we could both part ways amicably.
And your departure was linked to this malware incursion?
I would say that there was a great deal of disinformation put out there about, as you previously questioned, around my not approving spending, which has been refuted, which has been rubbished, it has been publicized properly, despite the attempts of the networks and IT team and others for that disinformation to sort of cloud the incompetence that was at play. So I would say at this point, in hindsight, I would say that played a significant role. But because it's a termination for no reason, and they effected that clause, I cannot say specifically what that would be. I would say that in the past year and a half, and I would venture out there, there has been significant amounts of hostility, animosity directed towards myself, and possibly the CEO can confer if it's, or concur if it's directed at her as well. But again, it was because of what was happening at TSTT. What we did at TSTT, and let's make no mistake, was remarkable. To turn a company that was on the brink of closing its doors to a profitable company. What should have been celebrated, Honorable Member, and should have been leveraged as best-in-class approach and techniques and practices for other government agencies or utilities was not. It was opposed. We are sitting here unemployed today because of that. So I can't say what was the sort of amalgamation of different reasons, but I can say in this situation, and I think we proudly state that what we have done for TSTT, no one has done before. No one has exercised the amount of due care and financial and fiduciary responsibility. And no one has done financially what anyone has done in the history of TSTT under the circumstances. So I cannot at this point pinpoint any specific reasons for my termination for no reason clause being effected.
If I could
Yes.
just piggyback on Member Endorsing's point. And of course, we don't want to go into all of the PR and industrial relations aspects, but it appears from the submissions that you felt that you were unfairly and unjustly treated because of the fallout emanating from the minister's erroneous statement to Parliament, especially since the letter given to the minister did not come from your office. At paragraph 12.2 of your submission, you stated that no one from the board ever had a conversation with you as to why your contract was being terminated. And then you also point out that no reason was given in the letter of termination. Is that correct?
Is that a question addressed to me?
Yeah.
Yes, and that is absolutely correct. In fact, on the morning of the 14th of November, I asked the chairman via WhatsApp to have a meeting. There was no response to that request. Instead, at approximately 2-something in the afternoon, I was handed a letter indicating that my contract was being terminated with immediate effect. No reason given. Again, there was a similar provision in my contract which allowed the company to terminate the contract on notice. One would have thought, however, in light of TSTT's performance management policies, in light of the most basic industrial relations practice in 2024 or 2023, that at the very least, a conversation with me as CEO with regard to how I discharged my responsibility during the crisis ought to have been facilitated, particularly in light of the fact of the tremendous turnaround that you see I have outlined in detail in my submission and to which Mr. Ramnarine spoke. First time in 7 years, a profit at TSTT. The removal of the going concern provision in the audited financials for the year ending March 2023. The Standard & Poor's upgrade of TSTT. And to add to something that Shiva said and the honorable member was asking, during this, just after this crisis, we were supposed to prepare a half-year statement for the chairman to make to the general public about TSTT's half-year performance following the investor call we had on the 10th of November. Exceptional performance against plan. The board refused to allow the publication of that half-year statement. And one has to ask yourself, why? Why was that not allowed? Is it that you did not want the CEO and the CFO to quote-unquote look good because of the excellent financial stewardship of TSTT? It's a question.
You, Member Endorsing, and then Member Leonce and Member Lizama Leasing.
Just quickly to wrap up, so from what I'm surmising here, both of you departed from TSTT without any proper communication, as you would have said the basic tenets of industrial relations practices in terms of communicating with you why the reason for being asked to depart the company. I just wanted to get that on record.
Honorable member, through the chair, that is correct.
Okay. And one final thing to you, Mr. Ramnarine, because I continue to hear this theme during your presentation of threats from vendors, significant cost cutting, and so on. And given the level of crime that occurs in our society and hits and so on being put on individuals, do you feel comfortable in relation to your daily function as a human being with your family and so on, given what you were involved with in the operations at TSTT?
At this moment, through the chair, honorable member, at this moment, I feel very comfortable. There are no issues or threats that can or should be taken seriously. These are vendors whose empires were crumbled because of the actions taken to remove supernormal profits out of their books, which TSTT was hemorrhaging at the time, and it was the right thing to do. Negotiate, reduce rates, find the right vendors, reduce costs. Any responsible CFO would do that. I would not have taken those threats seriously. In fact, one of those threats, a couple of those threats both myself and the former CEO spoke about, we dismissed it.
Thank you. Member Leons.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you, Ms. Agar, just following through on some of the things that you would have said earlier. You said to the committee that on the 3rd of October was actually the date where the incident would have taken place. And on the 9th of October, TSTT would have said to their customers they're experiencing issues that was service impacting and that the company was working to resolve the issues in the shortest possible time. And you also said that you were made aware of this on the 11th. My question is, on the 9th, when TSTT would have issued this, what was your involvement then? Because you are the head of this organization, and the organization is basically saying we have a problem, and we issuing a statement. What was your involvement in the issuing of the statement? And after the statement was issued, what did you do, or what information was shared with you for you to come to the committee now to say that you were only aware of this on the 11th?
Okay, so let me clarify your statement. So a significant breach occurred to TSTT's internal IT environment on the 3rd of October when an administrator's credentials were hacked and she was locked out of those credentials. On the 9th of October is when TSTT experienced the inability to access certain of its platforms. That is when the date that I was told that there was some sort of cyber attack. At that stage, information was very limited. And of course, the focus when these things happen, particularly if it is service impacting, is to get the services to customers back into operation as quickly as possible. So the networks and IT team would have set up a daily call at 6 p.m. I participated in most, if not all, of those calls, and we would go through very methodically what steps the organization was taking to isolate its data in a secure and quarantined environment, bring back up the applications, particularly those that were directly service impacting to customers, like the inability to call digital network, the challenges with some of the roaming, and most significantly, the inability to pay online. So we were very focused on restoring services to customers, and when we communicated on the 9th, what we communicated was that there was something happening in our networks which was impacting the ability of customers to access some of our services. So the time was spent treating with that. What, as I communicated, and if you read my submissions, you will see that I never found out about the incursion on the 3rd until I read it in the checkpoint interim report, which was provided to me on the 11th of November, 2023.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification. So it's safe to say that your actions for restoration would have started on the 9th, right? On the 30th, TSTT would have released a statement. Is it safe to say that in line with the minister's statement, where it quotes this company's cybersecurity infrastructure operated optimally and was able to restrict these criminals' vicious plans, there was no loss of compromise of customer data, i.e. no data was deleted from TSTT's database or manipulated at this time. At this time, the company has collaborated data currently in the public domain purported to the TSTT customer information. Was this part of the release?
Yes, that was part of the release, Honorable Member.
So this release, is it fair to say that this information was incorrect?
There's nothing in that release that is incorrect. No TSTT data was lost. TSTT was able to recover every bit of data from its backup files and recreate those in quarantined environments such that they will be able to bring back up every single application with data intact. One of the biggest things, if you read about cybersecurity incidents, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, and by the way, for the record, there have been 55 such cyber incidents in Trinidad and Tobago between 2022 and 2023. 55 reported through the TTC cert. When you read about cybersecurity incidents, not just those happening in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world, one of the biggest issues is the loss of data and the inability to bring back up your data that has been lost or encrypted. That's one of the biggest things.
In fact, member, my understanding of ransomware is the typical thing is that they lock and take control of your data, and then you can't get it back. So in this regard, TSTT would have actually done very well.
So which leads
That is correct.
Which leads me to my final question. Based on this, you said that you were you prepared a statement after the minister's release on the 1st, I believe it was, and the board prevented you, or they rejected your release of that statement. Was there any attempt to correct what may have been misinterpreted?
Sorry, attempt by whom?
By yourself.
That was the purpose of the statement. The purpose of the press release that I prepared on the 6th of November was in fact to clarify.
No, I understand they didn't want you to release to the public. I'm speaking of the responsibility to the line minister. Was there any attempt, based on what you would have seen, to get to the line minister in terms of correction?
And I think the chairman, in his submissions to this committee, would have explained the process of communicating with the chairman. And typically, to the line minister. And typically that would be done through the chairman or through the ministry directly to TSTT through the office of the CEO. At that stage, member, when I was being admonished in relation to my ability to communicate with the public, and I had prepared a press release to clarify the minister's statements, specifically in response to a comment made to me in a board meeting that I had embarrassed the minister. I did not think that in those circumstances, it was my duty to communicate with the minister. The duty and responsibility at that time remained squarely with the chairman of the board.
Thank you very much.
Member Leasing.
Thank you very kindly, Chairman. Chairman, please allow me to begin by thanking Member Ms. Agard and Mr. Ramnarang for their very comprehensive and detailed reports and the ensuing appendices that came with it. The documents that we received from the two of you are not necessarily in line with what we would have received at the previous inquiry in January when we met with the Board of Directors and the senior management of TSTT. I think it's safe to say it puts the committee into a deeper, not so much as a quagmire, but we now have a lot more investigations to do because a lot of information is coming to the fore that obviously was not here before, and we are happy that you have accepted the opportunity to be here this morning and to present your case, and we thank you very much for that. Ms. Agard, I want to follow up a little bit on what Member Leons was just asking. And I appreciate completely where you established that you were not aware until you saw the checkpoint report. Can I ask you, upon finding out through the checkpoint report, can you please provide this committee very briefly? I know you've been through it and I know it's in the document, but I just want to hear a synopsis of what your immediate actions would have been following your initial finding out about this cyber attack.
So to be clear, you want to know what my actions were when I found out on the 11th?
Yes, I
about
know
what
you
was
put
in
a
the checkpoint?
chronological timeline in here for us.
Yes, very detailed.
When you found out from the 11th.
And by the 14th,
up until the 14th
my contract was
November.
terminated.
Yes, so that's a
So
1
that's
month
like
and 3 days
2 days.
span. You found out about the 11th of?
The 12th of November. And by the 14th of November, my contract was prematurely terminated by TSTT.
Can you just?
So I really had no opportunity to investigate further as to this discrepancy between the third, a major event occurring in the IT environment on the 3rd of October
Right.
and the 9th of October. I really did not have any opportunity to probe that further.
Sorry, the checkpoint report that you found out about, the details that you got, that was the 11th of October or November?
November.
The 11th of November.
November.
So what happened in between that period of October the 3rd then to November the 11th? Because obviously things are circulating in the public domain, the minister has made statements, TSTT has put out some documents. What happened with you in that period?
Okay, so
I know you prepared a wonderful plan. I read it. I saw it.
I did. I provided, in fact, a very detailed chronology of everything that occurred almost by the minute in terms of when I was a CEO informed that there was a potential cybersecurity incident on the 9th of October. And as I communicated previously to this committee, TSTT was very focused at that stage on recovery, preventing further incursion and intrusion, and getting systems and networks back up, particularly as it related to customers' ability to pay online and any customer-facing services that we provided to our customers.
And sorry, this action was championed by you. You instructed the senior management to go in that direction to restore services?
No, that is there's a cyber security incidents policy in TSTT, which mirrors best international practice in relation to response to cybersecurity incidents, and it was that policy that was being followed.
Followed that through best practice, and therefore your units would have gone through all of these different steps.
Yes.
And can I ask you, were you monitoring, or can you explain to us who was responsible for monitoring the implementation of that best practice?
So that would be the networks and IT team. I participated on the 6 o'clock call every day, most of the days, when the IT team would communicate to the broader group that was on that call, what had been done that day, what the efforts were in relation to restoration, what the logs were turning up in terms of trying to identify root cause analysis, what continuous monitoring was taking place of networks, what recovery activities the company was engaged in, what additional efforts were being taken to harden the IT environment to make sure that such an event did not occur again. So I participated on that call most days. But in terms of the actual management of the incident, pulling the logs, looking at the monitoring activities, taking steps to harden the IT environment, that was very much being managed by the networks and IT team.
So in a nutshell, you basically kept your finger on the pulse to make sure that you were aware of what was going on and making sure that the network manager was doing what he was supposed to have done, what he and his team should have done. I'm asking if you think you were sufficiently involved in it.
Oh, I think participating on a daily call and providing guidance and support was very helpful. And not only that, let me go further. And I set it out in my submission. It was me that insisted that the networks and IT team hasten its interrogation and analysis of the 6 gig of data. They will tell you I was screaming every day, we have to get this completed because we need to communicate with the public about what data of theirs is out there. I was the one who pushed the team to complete the analysis of the data. I was the one who insisted that we bring in the external PR consultant to help our reputational team develop the communication that went out on the 3rd of November. It was I who caused the analysis to be done on the information on parliamentarians, on ministers, a deep dive into the bank account information that was out there as part of the data. I took a very active role, member, in terms of how this event was managed. However, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an IT expert, I'm not a cybersecurity professional, and so therefore my participation was to provide guidance and support to the team by making sure whatever resources they needed to complete their activities, they were given.
Thank you for that answer. The reason I ask you that is because in the public domain there were talks about sluggish reactions to things that are happening. And from what I am gathering here, the sluggish information really was just the output of communications, because internally you were leading your team to ensure that remedial works were being done and preventative measures were being done. Is that correct?
So again, I go back to the management and the whole communications piece and look at pages 60 to 66 of my submission. On that daily call was Mr. Kamal Georges, who heads the reputational brand team in TSTT. And his purpose for being on those daily calls was to advise the company that having regard to the updates given by the networks and IT team, whether we should communicate anything to the public. Based on that advice, you will see the chronology of public communication that went out. So I am, as you could imagine, I was very perplexed and taken aback by the contributions being made by Mr. Georges, and who reports to Mr. Gerard Cooper, who is the General Manager, Networks and Admin, through whom all communication was also approved, to hear them say, after the fact, that communication wasn't timely, and that communication wasn't accurate, and that we should have done a better job. I was the one who insisted on preparing an apology to customers. That came from me because I wanted them to understand that I understand their frustration, but I wanted very much, having regard to my tenets as a professional attorney at law, to communicate accurate information when we knew it. and to apologize to them that their data was stolen and exfiltrated by cyber criminals. So there is no question whatsoever of there being any lack of action on my part. People in TSTT, it is well known. I get into the office at 6 o'clock in the morning and leave 8 and 9 o'clock in the night, every day. So there's no question whatsoever of my not participating actively to the extent of my capabilities, having regard to the fact that I'm not an engineer, nor an IT expert, or a cybersecurity professional.
Thank you very kindly for those answers. Chairman, that's it for my questioning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Member. May I invite brief closing submissions? But before so, both of you have great depth of experience in the telecommunications sector. So if you can think of any recommendations you might like to make to this committee about things that perhaps we might consider doing in terms of legislation or support systems or a framework development plan, we would most welcome those contributions. So thank you. May I ask Mr. Ramnarayan to make his closing submissions first?
Thank you, Chair. Honorable members of the Joint Select Committee, as we conclude today's proceedings, I wish to express my sincere hope that my participation has shed some light on the critical issues and can assist in your deliberations. I hope the committee can address the glaring issues of incompetence, nepotism, and other conduct rampant in TSTT that is worth noting. Despite widespread pessimism, I must commend this committee for seeking to investigate this matter. As I reflect on these proceedings, several questions arise. Where else can an executive on extended probation and lowest ranked in performance be promoted to the highest office of the company? Where else can a board showcase its open hostility and animosity against the persons responsible for the turnaround of a company by terminating them? Where else can a company be returned to profitability against all odds and the architects and agents of change are terminated, instead of celebrated and leveraged the best-in-class behaviors and practices at failing national institutions and utilities? Could it be that the elevation of poor performance individuals paved the way for feeding frenzies for board members, vendors, and staff? This is my sincere concern after the work done to rehabilitate and remediate TSTT's financial position. I will leave this committee to draw its own inferences to the answers to the questions I just raised. But there are two messages I implore you to take away today. Firstly, the circumstances we have discussed today here is not normal. This is a simple miscommunication and should not be normalized. There's a lot at play here, a lot of undermining, a lot of collusion, a disruption to a company because people of poor performance chose to preserve their own self-interest. Working alongside board members who seize the opportunity, smoking gun, in order to get rid of the two agents of change within the company. The behavior of an acting GM of networks at the time, Sandor Smith, to outright lie and spread the disinformation about the imaginary spend I referenced several times purposefully during this hearing. Imaginary spend request that made its way to the public domain, newspapers, union publications. Deliberate. A board led by a chairman, unfortunately in my opinion, who did not chair this board as properly as he should have. After the exit of Mr. Elias, Mr. Myers, Mr. Narain, Mr. Jerry Brooks, that board, post-exit, took a very hostile position against the former CEO and myself because of the direction of fiduciary responsibility we chose to angle ourselves into. And lastly, let's not promote that meritocracy does not exist. It does. Let's not promote that performance is only secured through connections and favors, and promotions are only secured through connections and favors. Meritocracy does exist. So when we leave here today, that is something we need to keep in the back of our minds. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Seagard.
Mr. Chairman, unlike my opening, I will be very short. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of this committee for the opportunity to make the substantial submissions on the cybersecurity issue that afflicted TSTT in October 2023. It was very important for me, and the CFO just indicated, to contextualize for this committee the dire financial circumstances that TSTT found itself in. It is nothing short of miraculous that we were able to turn TSTT, a company on the brink of bankruptcy, and turn it around through the strict management of operating expenses and through a restructuring to put it on a path of sustainable growth and development, for which TSTT should be a blueprint for other state enterprises. Mr. Chairman, your invitation to comment on things from a policy perspective that may assist in treating with cybersecurity issues generally. As you know, I have been involved in this area for some time. In fact, I recall appearing before another Joint Select Committee representing the TTPBA on the cybersecurity legislation. And to my amazement, that legislation still has not been promulgated. So from a policy perspective, I would say a number of things. And in a way, this incident is a good wake-up call for the country as a whole. On the policy side, we need to promulgate the rest of the Data Protection Act, which gives very specific statutory protection, Member Wade, to data on private citizens held both in the government and in the private sector. Had legislation of that nature been in place, it would have forced us as a company and other entities subject of cyber attack to make very specific communications to people whose data was exfiltrated and leaked. I urge you in your deliberations to consider whether that piece of legislation should be brought into force in its entirety, and any other subsidiary legislation that would make the operationalization of that legislation effective. And then I would say as well, the cybersecurity legislation really must be passed. To be using still the Computer Misuse Act in 2024 is a disservice to our people. We really need to modernize from a legislative and policy perspective our cybersecurity posture. And then on the technical side, Chairman, I would say that companies, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector, have to really assess their IT environments and to look particularly for cybersecurity issues, because the threat actors are getting smarter, they're working in more malicious ways, and they can do enormous damage to your operations. So anything, Mr. Chairman, that this committee can do to advance the policy agenda to bring appropriate legislation in place, I think the people of Trinidad and Tobago will benefit from that kind of input. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members.
Thank you very much, Ms. Seagard. Before we conclude, we do have members from the various ministries. So I was wondering if the member from the Ministry of Finance, Ms. Sharon Mohammed, may wish to say anything?
Members and the committee for inviting us to this hearing. I look forward to further discussions on this TSTT cyber attack.
And Ms. Sharolan Solomon from the Permanent Secretary Acting from the Ministry of Public Utilities.
Good morning, Chair and members. I just basically would like to thank you all for inviting us to this session. And the cybersecurity issue is really a serious issue for organizations and ministries. So I would have noted the recommendations and the comments of the discussions today. And I just say thanks to the team.
Good morning. One of the core mandates for TSTT is to ensure that the citizenry enjoy overall improvements in telecommunication services. As such, in the monitoring of telecommunication initiatives for Trinidad and Tobago, the MP will continue to track these initiatives that contribute to the overall service for citizens. Again, we thank the committee for trying to elucidate some of the issues that happened during the cyber attack breach, and we do hope that these issues can be resolved going forward to improve the overall level of service for the citizenry.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. I am now going to suspend this meeting, and we will reconvene in camera. Thank you again. Good day.